Welcome to The Explainer. You hear it all the time, right? The economy is booming. But what if the actual data is telling a totally different story? Today, we're going to dive into a source that does just that. It puts the official, optimistic narrative right up against a wave of, well, pretty concerning numbers. Let's see what's really going on.
All right, so let's start with the official story. It's pretty rosy. The message we're getting from the top is crystal clear. Inflation, it's under control. And get ready because a huge economic boom is just around the corner. It's the picture of success, right? But the source we're digging into today is basically saying, hold on a minute. It argues that this whole upbeat story is crashing like head-on into a wall of brand new data. And that sets up a really clear conflict for us. It's the official narrative versus the cold, hard numbers. So this source starts painting this picture of growing instability around the world. It actually calls it a messy divorce from the United States. And it argues that this pressure from the outside is getting mixed with a bunch of really troubling economic science right here at home. All of which, you guessed it, tell a completely different story. Okay, so what are these warning signs they're talking about? Well, the source starts by digging right into the key domestic data. And first up on the chopping block is the job market.
Now, if you just look at the surface, the big headline number for initial jobless claims was 209,000. And look, if you take that number all by itself, you might think, hey, that's pretty good. It seems to suggest a pretty stable labor market. But, and this is a big but, the source really urges us to look a little closer. See that 209,000 number? It only looks good because the number from the week before was quietly revised upward to be worse. So what the source is saying is that the underlying trend, the direction things are actually heading, is still negative. And this is where the concern really starts to look ahead. The source points to this wave of huge planned layoff announcements from some really big-name companies. The argument here is super important. These aren't cuts because of what happened in the past. Nope. These are strategic moves based on a pretty pessimistic view of where the economy is going. Okay, next up, the source takes a look at consumer confidence. And yikes, it finds that how people feel about their money right now and what they expect for the future have both just plummeted. And the comparison it makes is really alarming. We're talking about confidence levels hitting territory we haven't seen since right before the 2008 financial crisis. All right, now let's talk inflation. To really get what the source is arguing here, we have to look at this thing called the Producer Price Index, or PPI for short. Basically, you can think of it as tracking inflation from the seller's point of view. It's all about the costs businesses are dealing with long before a product ever even hits the store shelf. And this leads to what the source literally calls a holy shit moment. You've got this sudden, super sharp spike in what producers are paying, and that is seen as a massive red flag. Why? Because history tells us that when it costs businesses more to make stuff, those higher prices almost always get passed on to us, the consumers, usually within about 2 months. The last point they make in this section has to do with the trade balance. And what the source notes is that imports are climbing while our exports are falling. It argues this flies directly in the face of the narrative that all these tariff policies are actually helping to boost American exports. And that brings us to what the source considers its main event, its top story, the real state of U.S. manufacturing. And this is a big deal because it's been presented as the absolute centerpiece, the crown jewel of the administration's whole economic policy. So the official story, and this is quoted right from the source, is that we're in the middle of a massive boom in factory building. The whole idea is that these construction jobs we're seeing today are going to magically morph into thousands and thousands of permanent factory jobs tomorrow. But yeah, you knew there was a but coming. The source puts this claim side by side with data it pulls straight from the Census Bureau. So while the claim is this burst in factory construction, the source points out that, well, overall construction spending is actually down compared to last year. And here is the absolute kicker. When you zoom in on the very specific category of manufacturing construction, the thing this whole boom claim is built on, the source says the data shows it's down. Not just down, but down 9.6% year over year. That is not a boom. That is a pretty significant drop. So that naturally leads to the question, right? If manufacturing construction is down, then where is all this construction growth actually coming from? Well, the source breaks it down for us. It's coming from areas like transportation, power, sewage and waste disposal, water supply, and conservation. And the source has a pretty clear explanation for this. It argues this growth isn't the result of any new policies.
Instead, it's spending that was already baked in the cake, tied to older legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Sciences Act.
Okay, so now the analysis pulls the camera back a bit to look at the bigger picture, these broader pressures. The source argues there are a bunch of external risks out there that are just adding another layer of complexity to the whole U.S. economic situation. First up, there's a warning sign flashing from Japan. Apparently, their central bank made what's known as a rate check. The source interprets this as a really strong hint that they might be about to jump into the currency markets. So why should we in the U.S. care? Well, because Japan is the biggest foreign owner of U.S. debt. Any little change in their strategy could create some serious turbulence for our ability to borrow money. The source also draws a direct line from domestic policy to the rising energy bills that are hitting American households. It points to a few different factors, like a huge surge in electricity demand thanks to all the new data centers being built, plus the loss of some key renewable energy subsidies. And you can bet that impact is being felt, right in people's wallets. According to the source, electricity costs for U.S. households shot up by a whopping 12.7% in just the first 9 months of last year. And the scary part is that trend doesn't show any signs of slowing down. And last but not least, the source points to geopolitical risk. It notes that after falling for a while, crude oil prices are climbing once again. And it warns that any major military conflict anywhere in the world could just send those prices absolutely skyrocketing. So let's wrap this all up. The big takeaway from the source is this: that official story of a booming, successful economy is being taken apart piece by piece by the actual data. Whether you're looking at jobs, inflation, trade, or that so-called manufacturing boom, the source contends that all the signs are pointing to a very, very different reality. And this really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? It's kind of at the heart of this whole analysis. When the story we're being told by officials is in direct conflict with the raw data, how do we, just as regular people trying to stay informed, figure out what's really going on with the economy? This apparently forced the courts and Congress into totally uncharted territory. We're talking about a moment where the very bedrock of the government was tested in a way it had never been before. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. What exactly happened inside that courtroom to kick off this entire national crisis?
It all comes down to this number, 17. The source we're looking at claims that 17 separate times, under oath, Donald Trump's lawyers denied that certain emails the court was asking for even existed. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't treated as some simple mistake or a misunderstanding. No, the source claims the judge looked at these repeated denials, especially since the court already had evidence to the contrary, and ruled that it was the felony of perjury. We're talking about a deliberate lie told under oath. That's a huge deal. And what's really interesting here is how this all went down. The source makes it clear this wasn't some chaotic outburst. It was, a very methodical step-by-step enforcement of the rules. You can see the sequence here. The lawyers deny, the judge reveals the proof, rules it's perjury, and then, boom, the judge orders federal marshals to physically escort the entire legal team right out of the courtroom. Okay, but the judge didn't just stop there and pause the trial. No, what the source says happened next was an escalation, something apparently unlike anything we've ever seen before in U.S. history. And the source really, really drives this point home. I mean, think about it. This didn't happen during Watergate with Nixon. It didn't happen during the Clinton impeachment. According to this material, never before has a sitting federal judge, during an active trial, sent evidence for impeachment directly to Congress. And listen to this. We're not talking about a summary or a recommendation letter. The source claims the judge sent the actual stuff, the full courtroom transcripts showing the alleged lies, the very emails the defense team swore didn't exist, even body cam footage from the marshals removing the lawyers, and reportedly recordings of the president. So what did this all mean? Well, according to the source, this one action completely changed the entire game. Suddenly, the president's most powerful tool, delay, stalling, running out the clock, was just gone, neutralized. The timeline wasn't political anymore. It was judicial. And that's a clock that doesn't care about rallies.